The cold, dark waves of the North Atlantic carried secrets. Metal beasts lurking beneath the surface, hunting, hiding, and killing in silence. In 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic had become a war within a war, a shadow conflict fought not by armies, but by men encased in steel and salt water. And among these men, none were more feared or more superstitious than the crews of the German U-boats. To most of them, the sea was alive. It watched, it punished, it remembered. Every mission was a gamble, every dive a brush with death. But one particular patrol would etch itself into naval history, not for victory, but for what those sailors saw when they boarded a captured enemy ship. It was supposed to be a rare moment of triumph. Instead, it turned into something that would haunt them long after the war ended. It began on a fog-choked morning in early 1942, somewhere between Iceland and the Faroe Islands. A British destroyer, HMS Arden, had been separated from her convoy during a brutal Atlantic storm. The ship had already been damaged by a near miss from a German torpedo days before. Her radio antenna snapped. Engines faltering, she drifted through the gray emptiness of the North Atlantic, alone. The Kriegsmarine's U-boat command in Lorya had received faint, garbled reports of a crippled Royal Navy ship adrift in the area. To German naval intelligence, this was an opportunity, a chance to capture valuable enemy technology, radar codes, or communication systems. So they dispatched U-1024 under the command of Captain Lieutenant Otto Reinhardt, one of the youngest but most precise U-boat commanders in the Atlantic. Reinhardt's crew was experienced, men who had survived depth charge attacks, aircraft bombardments, and the terror of the Black Pit, where Allied escort ships were scarce. They were proud, efficient, and utterly loyal to their captain. But they were not prepared for what they were about to find. By dawn on the second day of the search, the sea had calmed. Visibility stretched for miles across an endless mirror of gray-blue water. And then, through the mist, they saw it. A shape on the horizon, lifeless but looming. The silhouette of a destroyer. Through binoculars, they could see the Union Jack faintly painted along the stern, fluttering weakly in the wind. The ship listed slightly to port, smoke stains trailing down its superstructure. No visible movement. No distress signals. It looked abandoned. Reinhardt ordered the U-boat to surface. The diesel engines rumbled, breaking the silence of the Atlantic as the steel beast rose from the depths. The men climbed onto the deck, their eyes fixed on the destroyer, its guns unmanned, its bridge shattered by shrapnel. For a moment, there was awe. Even enemy ships carried a certain majesty. Massive, fast, deadly. But as they approached in their small rubber boat, a strange unease began to settle over them. No one waved. No one shouted. No one moved. The boarding party climbed up the hull using grappling hooks, their boots scraping against the scorched metal. The air smelled of oil, seawater, and something else, something faint, metallic, almost sweet. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Reinhardt himself stepped onto the main deck, pistol drawn, scanning every corner. The ship's main gun had been locked in firing position, as if frozen mid-battle. Shell casings littered the floor. A single spotlight was still on, flickering weakly. The ship looked as if it had been fighting until the last second. They moved toward the bridge. A trail of dry blood led across the deck to a shattered hatch. When they entered, they found the first body, an officer slumped over the navigation table, his hand still gripping a pencil, a map of convoy routes beneath him. His face was pale, eyes open, frozen in shock. There were no gunshot wounds, no signs of an explosion nearby. He looked terrified. One by one, more bodies were found at the radio room, in the mess hall, near the engine bay. Dozens of them. No sign of battle damage beyond what was already visible from outside. The crew seemed to have died suddenly, without warning. Then they found the logbook. Reinhardt ordered it brought to the bridge. Its last entry was written in hurried, almost trembling handwriting. Engaged with U-boat contact. Damage to stern. Attempted repairs. Radar picking up strange signals, multiple contacts, no visual confirmation. Crew reports hearing voices on deck at night. Engineering crew refuses to go below after midnight. Captain believes the sea itself is calling. The entry ended there. No signature, no final note. Reinhardt frowned, flipping through the previous pages. The tone of the entries changed in the final days. More frantic, less structured. Mentions of crewmen seeing figures near the torpedo storage. Machinery working on its own. A sailor found dead, as if drowned, though the ship hadn't taken on water. It read like madness, but the men on board had clearly believed it. The U-boat crew was instructed to take whatever they could for intelligence. Radio parts, radar schematics, weapons data. But as they explored deeper into the destroyer's hull, unease turned into dread. Tools were scattered everywhere, as if dropped mid-task. A kettle still sat on the stove, cold but upright. A half-eaten meal on a table. It was as though everyone had simply stopped living. One of the German sailors muttered a quiet prayer under his breath. Another refused to go below deck again after hearing what he swore sounded like footsteps behind him. But Reinhardt, calm, logical, scientific, dismissed it all. Nonsense, he told them. Fear makes men see ghosts. Finish the inspection. And yet, as night began to fall, even he would start to feel the weight of something he couldn't explain. The sea had turned black by the time the inspection stretched into the night. The horizon disappeared into an endless void, the waves whispering softly against the hulls of both vessels. A half-moon shone faintly through the clouds, throwing long, shifting shadows across the deck of the British destroyer. Inside, the corridors of HMS Arden were colder than any of the Germans expected. The air was damp and stale, like the inside of a crypt. Flashlights flickered across torn charts and overturned chairs. The men's boots echoed hollowly on the steel floors. They moved in pairs now, Reinhardt's orders. Even he admitted it felt wrong to be alone here. The engineering compartment was the next stop. Two mechanics from the U-boat, veterans of years beneath the Atlantic, descended the ladder with cautious steps. They expected to find signs of flooding, fire, or sabotage. Instead, what they found was nothing. No damage, no water ingress, no sign of mechanical failure. The engines were intact, almost pristine. One of the men remarked quietly, "She could still sail, her captain, if we got her running again." Reinhardt nodded, but said nothing. He was staring at the main generator, still faintly humming. That shouldn't have been possible. The ship had been adrift for days, maybe longer. There was no one left to keep the systems running. And yet, somewhere in the depths of the ship, power still pulsed through the cables. In the communications room, the U-boat's radio man tried to make sense of the destroyer's last transmissions. Most were standard distress calls, static-filled, rushed, interrupted mid-sentence. But then there was something stranger. A repeating message, transmitted again and again on loop, like a distress beacon that refused to die. It said only 4 words. "Don't follow the voices." The radio man called Reinhardt over. "Captain, listen." He turned the dial, and the message played again. The voice was trembling, almost whispering. British accent. Male. Definitely human, but faint, as though spoken from a great distance. Reinhardt frowned. It's an automated loop, probably triggered before they died. The radio man swallowed hard. Then, who's still transmitting it? That question hung in the air. The men returned to the deck before midnight. The wind had picked up again, sharp and restless. Reinhardt decided to set up a watch through the night. Half the boarding crew would remain on Arden, half on the U-boat. They'd complete the transfer of materials by dawn. But as the night deepened, the men on the destroyer began to hear it. The sound of footsteps echoing along the upper deck. Slow, deliberate, heavy. At first, they assumed it was just one of their own crew checking equipment. But when they called out, no one answered. When they climbed to the deck to look, there was no one there. The sea was calm. The fog was gone. Only the British flag flapped lazily above them. Then came the voices. Not clear words, more like whispers just at the edge of hearing, rising and falling with the wind. Some swore it was English. Others thought it sounded German. One sailor insisted it was neither. Something older, something that didn't belong to any tongue. Below deck, the air grew colder still. Tools clattered in the dark without being touched. A locker door creaked open and shut by itself. One man dropped his flashlight when he saw a reflection in a window, a pale face staring back at him from the outside of the glass, as though someone were floating just beyond it. Reinhardt ordered everyone back to the U-boat immediately. He wasn't about to lose men to hysteria on a derelict ship. But even as they began climbing down into their small boat, several sailors swore they heard the destroyer's engines turning over, just for a moment, as if the ship was coming back to life. By dawn, they were gone. The U-boats submerged, leaving the HMS Arden adrift once more. What happened next would only deepen the mystery. When Reinhardt's report reached U-boat command in WWII, it was heavily censored. The official record listed the destroyer as abandoned, scuttled after inspection. The details of the strange radio signals, the condition of the crew, and the accounts of the men were omitted. Only Reinhardt's private journal told the rest of the story. He wrote of nightmares after the encounter, dreams of drowning men, of voices calling through static. Several crew members reported similar dreams. The radio man, in particular, became increasingly unstable. He swore the same message, "Don't follow the voices," kept appearing on their own U-boats' receivers even after they'd left the area. He begged the captain to turn back and sink the British destroyer. Reinhardt refused. Days later, the radio man was found dead, having locked himself inside the torpedo room. No note, no struggle. The Kriegsmarine tried to explain it all away: fatigue, pressure, paranoia. But even German naval historians later admitted that several other U-boats reported ghost transmissions around that same sector in 1942. Distorted signals, echoes of distress calls from ships that no longer existed. The British Navy's archives tell a similar tale. HMS Arden was indeed listed as missing at sea for 3 weeks. When she was later found by Allied aircraft, she was still afloat, but completely empty. No trace of the German boarding party's presence, no documents, no clues. The ship was towed back toward Scapa Flow for investigation, but halfway home, she sank. No storm, no torpedoes, just gone. To this day, some naval historians believe the story of Arden was exaggerated, an old mariner's myth born from fear and isolation. But others note the peculiar details that match real wartime records. The U-1024's final patrol log stopping abruptly that same month. Reinhardt's name disappearing from official rolls. The fact that German intelligence ceased sending inspection orders for derelict ships after 1942. Whatever they saw that night, it changed them. And as the years went on, the legend of the haunted destroyer spread through both navies. British sailors called her the ghost of the Atlantic. German crews whispered that she was Die Stimme des Meeres, the voice of the sea. And somewhere in those endless waters, both sides agreed on one thing. There are places in the ocean that remember. Places man is not meant to board twice. But for the men of U-1024, their encounter was not yet over. What followed would seal their fate and turn one mysterious boarding into one of the most chilling maritime disappearances of the entire war. Days after leaving the derelict destroyer behind, U-1024 cut silently through the Atlantic depths. The crew spoke little now. Conversations that once filled the cramped submarine had dwindled to uneasy whispers. Even the clatter of tools or hum of machinery felt different, slower, heavier, as if the sea itself were pressing in on them. Captain Lieutenant Reinhardt kept a calm face, but inside, he was uneasy. He had dismissed the talk of ghosts. Yet each night, when the lights dimmed and the men drifted into uneasy sleep, he could still hear it, the faint murmur of voices through the hull. Sometimes they seemed to be calling his name. At first, he blamed it on faulty wiring or radio interference. But when the chief engineer reported hearing the same sounds without the radio even powered on, Reinhardt ordered a full inspection of the communication systems. Nothing was wrong. Everything worked perfectly. The next night, they received a signal. It came on the same British frequency they'd intercepted aboard HMS Arden. A soft, rhythmic tapping, Morse code. The operator wrote it down slowly, his hands trembling. When he finished, the words spelled out, U-1024. Come back. No German codes. No Allied signature. Just that, over and over. Reinhardt ordered the transmission silenced, but the operator refused to return to duty afterward. He said he heard breathing behind him as the message came through. Then came the mechanical failures. One of the diesel engines began overheating without cause. Gauges spun erratically. The depth meter dropped to 0 even though they were cruising at 60 meters. It was as if the U-boat's instruments were being played with. The men tried to focus on routine, but their nerves were fraying. They slept in shifts now, some refusing to go near the lower torpedo bay, the same place where the radio man had died days before. That's when the sonar man heard it. A contact, large, metallic, moving slowly behind them. No propeller noise. No sign of life. Just a solid echo, following them mile after mile. When they changed course, it changed course too. When they stopped, it stopped. Reinhardt ordered a dive to test it. The contact vanished, then reappeared, closer, almost beneath them. The sonar operator turned pale. "It's right under us," he whispered. And then, the tapping began again. This time it wasn't Morse. It was louder, rhythmic, metallic, coming from beneath the hull, from outside the submarine. Bang, bang, bang. Slow, deliberate knocks, echoing through the steel. The men froze. No one spoke. No one moved. Reinhardt, his hand shaking slightly, whispered, "Surface." Now, the U-boat rose through the black water, bursting into the cold night air. The crew opened the hatches, gasping for breath as moonlight spilled inside. The sea around them was calm, almost mirror-like. But off their port side, something floated in the distance. At first it looked like wreckage. Then, as the fog parted, they saw the shape, long, sleek, unmistakable. A destroyer. Reinhardt's binoculars confirmed it. The same number, the same silhouette. HMS Arden, the ship they had left to drift days earlier, now right beside them in the middle of the Atlantic. The destroyer's lights were on. Its deck lamps glowed faintly. No movement, no signal, just a dead ship watching them. The crew panicked. Some begged to dive again, others to fire torpedoes. Reinhardt hesitated. Logic told him it was impossible. Currents couldn't have carried the destroyer hundreds of miles. And yet there it was. Before he could decide, their own radio crackled to life. A faint voice, male, English. "Come, don't follow the voices." Then static. Then silence. Moments later, every light aboard the U-boat flickered and went out. The engine stalled. The systems went dead. Only the emergency lights glowed, bathing the cabin in red. In the distance, the destroyer's lamps blinked once, twice, and then slowly faded, sinking back into the mist. When power returned seconds later, the sonar showed nothing. No contact. No wreckage. The sea was empty again. For 2 more days, Reinhardt ordered full silence. No transmissions, no surfacing, no risks. He logged nothing in the ship's journal after that night. U-1024 was never heard from again. Weeks later, Allied aircraft reported oil slicks near the coast of Ireland. The wreck of a German submarine was eventually discovered in 1946, partially intact, lying at the bottom of the sea. There were no signs of battle damage. No evidence of torpedo impact. The hull was sealed, the hatches closed. Inside, the remains of the crew were found at their stations, peaceful, undisturbed. No struggle, no flooding, just silence. Reinhardt's journal was recovered from his cabin, water damaged but partially legible. His final entry read, "Engines steady. No contact since Night of the Voices. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the sea whispering beneath us." It sounds like her. Naval historians have debated for decades what really happened to U-1024. Some claim it suffered mechanical failure and sank due to carbon monoxide poisoning, an all-too-common fate for submariners. Others believe the crew, exhausted and haunted by paranoia, made a fatal navigational error. But among sailors, especially those who crossed the North Atlantic during the war, another story endures. They say the destroyer Arden still drifts somewhere out there, appearing only in dense fog, sending ghost transmissions that repeat endlessly across forgotten frequencies. British and German veterans alike have claimed to hear it, a faint voice cutting through static. Don't follow the voices. Whether it was madness, coincidence, or something beyond explanation, one truth remains. War leaves ghosts that don't rest easily. Ships vanish, but their stories don't. And in the endless gray of the Atlantic, where sound travels farther than sight, sometimes the past still calls back. Because the ocean never forgets. It remembers every scream, every whisper, every ship that dared to cross its depths. And maybe, just maybe, it remembers the men of U-1024 and the destroyer they should have never boarded.